They say the past never truly leaves. Here on this abandoned parking lot, there once stood a circus, but not an ordinary circus. Every night, as the mist blankets the ground, whispers and laughter echo through the darkness. Tonight, we venture into a place where reality crosses paths with the spirit world. Welcome to the ghostly circus. In the outskirts of a large city, where the asphalt had long cracked and the neon lights had faded, there was one place almost no one remembered. It was an old, abandoned parking lot at the edge of town. Many years ago, it had been a busy place. Cars streaming in and out, doors slamming, people rushing to movies and concerts. But after a shopping mall was built nearby and the old cinema closed, the parking lot became nothing more than a forgotten relic, slowly consumed by time. However, one late evening, someone noticed something strange. At first, it was just a faint melody coming from the empty space, like the sound of an old gramophone. The music was odd yet familiar, like something from a long-forgotten childhood. The soft chords, which at first seemed distant, grew louder with each passing minute, as though someone were playing a piano in an empty room. The first person who decided to approach was Max. He was a local blogger, always on the lookout for unusual stories for his videos. His passion for uncovering the city's secrets took him to the darkest corners, and this abandoned parking lot, which shouldn't have been interesting at all, caught his attention. One night, armed with his camera and a flashlight, he decided to find out what was happening. When Max got closer, he saw something that took him by surprise. A huge circus tent, standing tall in the middle of the parking lot. Its dark outline stood out against the night sky, and the mysterious music that drifted from inside seemed to draw him in. There were no cars around, but the strange feeling that someone was watching him didn't leave. He hesitated for a moment, but forced himself to step closer. As soon as he stepped inside, his eyes adjusted to the darkness, and what he saw took his breath away. The circus, like something from a long-forgotten memory, unfolded before him. A Ferris wheel slowly spun, though there was no sign of anyone controlling it. Distant lights flickered in the stands, and the stage was bathed in soft light, creating a ghostly atmosphere. The performance had already begun. Mad acrobats soared through the air, vanishing mid-flight. Inflatable clowns with stretched faces wore eerie smiles, and dancing puppets moved in ways that didn't seem possible. But their movements were not normal. They were smooth and unconscious, as though they weren't alive but merely shadows from the past. Max, mesmerized by the scene, stood still, unable to look away. He felt the music that filled the space, as though it were a spell binding him. He couldn't leave. For a brief moment, he saw a figure step out from the dark corner of the circus. He was dressed in a vintage ringmaster's costume, with a top hat on his head and a wide smile on his face. "Welcome to the circus," he said, as though Max had been expected. "You're here to see something more than just a show. You're here to become part of this night." Max wanted to respond, but words caught in his throat. He felt something cold gripping his heart. He was trapped. He realized that the circus wasn't just a performance. It was a place that consumed, that captured, and would not let go. Just then, the ringmaster noticed Max's gaze and approached him. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Everyone here is a volunteer." But perhaps not everyone knows what they're signing up for. Max tried to speak but couldn't. He felt as if something was tightening around him, binding him to this place. The music, the ringmaster's voice, the dancing puppets. All of it was so mesmerizing that Max couldn't break free. But then his eyes fell on the people in the stands. They weren't just spectators. They looked like ghosts, sitting motionless, with empty eyes as if they too were prisoners of this place, locked in it for eternity. Max understood. The circus wasn't just a show. It was a place where people became part of something much greater and far more dangerous. Suddenly, he saw a man in the audience, a young guy who looked like he had just walked in, stand up and start running toward the exit. No one tried to stop him. He ran, and in that moment, Max realized there was a way out. He knew that he had to stop watching the show, stop listening to the music, and just run. Max took a step toward the exit, but the ringmaster blocked his path. "An exit," he said with a chuckle. "There is no exit here. This is the place of eternity." But Max didn't stop. He dodged the ringmaster and, despite the heaviness in his legs, hurried toward the exit. His mind screamed one thing: don't look back, just run. And he did, until he finally stepped out into the street. Silence surrounded him. The parking lot was empty, and the circus had vanished as though it had never been there. The music had stopped. He stood on the dark, empty parking lot, still feeling the weight of what he had just experienced. The next morning, when Max woke up, he discovered that his camera only recorded a few seconds of footage, and then nothing. But he knew it had all been real. He couldn't forget that night, those wonders and horrors of the circus that had tried to hold him. But now he knew how to escape, and how not to become part of that eternal show. The next few days were a blur for Max. He tried to get back to his normal life, but the feeling of being watched never left him. That strange melody echoed in his head, drawing him back to that same parking lot. He tried to ignore it, but it only grew louder, more insistent. A week later, he found himself returning to the same spot. He knew it was a mistake, but the curiosity gnawed at him. The music was the same, almost like a lure, and he couldn't resist. When he arrived, the tent was there again. But something was different. It didn't feel like before. There was no fear this time, just a strange pull to enter. He didn't even think twice as he walked toward it. As he neared, he noticed the same shadowy figures standing by the edge of the lot, staring at the tent but not moving. They were like forgotten memories, silently watching the circus, waiting for something. Then out of the corner of his eye, Max noticed a woman in an aerialist costume standing at the entrance. She didn't move. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes were dark, as though they could see right through him. "You're back," she said, her voice both soft and chilling. "But you know you can't enter without consequences." Max froze. "Consequences?" he repeated. The woman didn't answer immediately. She studied him, as though searching for something in his expression. "Everyone who comes here loses something important. Some lose time, others lose memory, and some lose themselves. Are you sure you want to know?" Max hesitated but nodded. His curiosity was stronger than his fear. "I can't ignore this anymore," he said. "I need to understand what this is." The woman glanced at him once more before stepping aside and vanishing into the darkness. Max entered the tent. Inside, the circus was different than before. It was alive, as though it were part of this world, part of time itself. The acrobats flew through the air, but their movements were now more frantic, almost desperate. The clowns with their stretched faces no longer smiled. Their eyes were filled with sorrow and loneliness. The dancing puppets moved faster and faster, as if trying to break free from their strings but unable to. Max felt his body start to change. He didn't know what was happening, but everything seemed more vivid. Every note of the music sank into his skin. Every movement of the acrobats made his heart race. He wanted to stop, but he couldn't. He was trapped again. And then he saw her, the ringmaster, that same figure wearing the dusty top hat, his face covered in grime, but the smile still there. "You've returned," he said, as though it was inevitable. "You can't leave until you find what you've lost, and only when you find it will the circus let you go." Max felt something heavy settle on his chest. He couldn't breathe. The music grew louder and louder, and the circus spun around him like a mad kaleidoscope. Then Max screamed. It wasn't just a scream of fear, it was a cry for freedom. And the moment his voice shattered the silence, time stopped. Everything froze. The lights went out, and the circus vanished. Max stood in the darkness, but he wasn't alone. He felt the presence of others around him, the same forgotten spectators who had once been part of this world. They weren't evil. They weren't dangerous. They were just here. "You've come back," one of them said, and Max realized it was the same young man who had escaped the first time. "I didn't know what to do," Max answered. "You're not alone," the man said. "We're all here because we couldn't leave. But now you can help us. You know how to escape." And Max understood. He knew what he had to do to end this curse. He knew he had to find what he had lost, to find his freedom. And when he did, everything vanished. The circus disappeared. The music stopped. From that moment on, Max never heard that music again. But he knew one thing. He was free. And that freedom had come at the price of everything he had experienced. Max awoke the next morning. his body still trembling with the remnants of the night's experience. He couldn't shake the feeling that something deep within him had changed. The memory of the circus, the eerie music, and the specters who lingered in that place haunted his mind. Despite the silence, he felt its presence. It was like the circus was still there, waiting for him to return. He tried to convince himself it had all been a nightmare, something his mind had conjured up in the stillness of the night. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the lights of the tent flickering in the distance, the faces of the spectators, their eyes hollow and fixed. He couldn't escape it. Days passed, and Max tried to return to his normal life. He met with friends, worked on his blog, and even managed to go out for drinks a few times. But nothing felt the same. The weight of what he had seen kept pressing on him, like an invisible hand on his chest. One evening, after an exhausting day, Max found himself once again on the outskirts of the city. His feet moved of their own accord, and before he knew it, he was standing in front of the abandoned parking lot. The old, cracked pavement stretched out before him, the eerie silence heavy in the air. For a moment he stood there, staring at the empty lot, trying to convince himself that it was all over. But deep down he knew better. The music had started again, faint at first, like the hum of an old record player, but unmistakable. The melody crept into his mind, weaving itself into his thoughts, pushing him forward. He couldn't stop himself. His legs carried him toward the lot, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and curiosity. As he approached, the circus tent appeared, just as it had before, towering over the parking lot like a monstrous shadow. The lights flickered weakly, but they were enough to draw him in. Max stepped inside, his breath quickening as he did. The air was thick with anticipation. The performers were already in motion, their movements graceful yet unsettling. The acrobats twisted through the air, their bodies bending in unnatural ways. The clowns, their painted faces frozen in grim smiles, watched him as if they knew he would return. The music, once soft and distant, now enveloped him like a heavy fog. But this time, it was different. There was no ringmaster to greet him, no welcoming figure with a chilling smile. The circus felt colder, more oppressive. The shadows seemed to grow longer, darker, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Max wandered deeper into the tent, his mind spinning. The place felt familiar, but it also felt wrong. The sense of unease grew with each step. He could feel the eyes of the spectators following him, their hollow gazes boring into his soul. They were no longer silent observers. They were waiting for something, for him. Then he saw her, the aerialist from the night before, standing at the edge of the ring. Her face was pale as before, but her eyes were different now. They were wide, filled with something that Max couldn't quite understand. Something like pity or perhaps fear. "You came back," she said, her voice softer than before. "You don't belong here. You never did." Max's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean? What is this place?" Her gaze shifted toward the other performers, the clowns and acrobats, their eyes still locked on him. "This is a place for those who lose themselves," she whispered. "The circus claims what it desires, and once you're part of it, you can never truly leave." Max felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had heard those words before, but now they carried a deeper meaning. He understood now. The circus wasn't just an event. It was a trap for souls lost to their desires, to their curiosity, to their need for something more. "You're not just a spectator," the aerialist continued. "You're one of us now, and soon you will forget who you were, what you had, what you loved." Max stepped back, his mind racing. He couldn't allow himself to be trapped here. He couldn't let the circus consume him too. But no matter how hard he tried, the more he looked around, the more the atmosphere felt suffocating. The air grew thicker, and the ground beneath him seemed to shift as though it were alive. "There's a way out," the aerialist whispered, her voice barely audible over the deafening music. "But it's not a simple one. You must remember who you were. You must find the thing you lost, and only then can you leave." Max's chest tightened as he realized what he had to do. He had to confront the past. He had to remember what he had lost in the chaos of his life. He closed his eyes and focused on his memories. The sounds of the circus seemed to fade, and in the silence he saw it, his childhood home, his family, the things that once brought him joy. The circus had taken that from him, and he had to reclaim it. As he did, a strange sensation washed over him. The lights flickered, the performers froze, and the music stopped. For the first time, Max felt a sense of clarity, as though the spell was breaking. The aerialist smiled, her eyes softening. "You found it," she said. "Now you can go." And just like that, the circus began to fade. The shadows dissolved, the performers vanished, and the music fell silent. Max stood alone in the parking lot, the night air cold and quiet around him. He took a deep breath, knowing that he had escaped, but at what cost? He would never forget what he had seen, what he had felt. The circus would always be there, lurking in the forgotten corners of the world, waiting for its next lost soul. But Max had found his way out, and he knew now that no matter what, he would never lose himself again.